We are on day 9 of the hearing in EIB 21-27 and have reached the 5 o'clock public comment period. Several of you have reached out to the board administrator, Pam Jones, and I will call on you expressly. Annie and Athena Hanna, Catherine Brichalba, Sandra West, April Perkins, and Jim Williams. If you're on the platform and did not reach out to the administrator, I am still happy to accept your comment. Simply reach out through the chat with your name. Chat is enabled for everyone. Comment, like all testimony before the board, is taken under oath. It is received by audio, not video, and it is limited to 5 minutes. So let me look for Annie and Athena Hanna. Not seeing the Hannas. Catherine Brichalba. Let me look. Oh, there. Ms. Brichalba. Ms. Brichalba, I've unmuted you. Can you hear me? Ms. Brichalba? She may have stepped away. Okay. Ms. Brichalba? No. All right. Let me move to Sandra West. I'm not seeing Sandra West. Kind of striking out here. Let me look to April Perkins. I'm not seeing April Perkins. And let me look for Jim Williams. No, I'm not seeing Jim Williams either. And I don't see anyone reaching out through the chat. I will try Ms. Brahal. Oh, there's an Annie Hanna. Ms. Hanna, I've unmuted you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, thank you. Would you spell your name, please?
Yes, Annie, spelled A-N-N-I. Hanna, H-A-N-N-A.
Thank you. And if you would raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
All right, I'm going to start your 5 minutes now.
Hi, my name is Annie, and I'm a mom, and I'm very concerned about climate change and my children having a future. And thank you for the opportunity to comment today. I live in Albuquerque, and I'm a teacher and a photographer, and I love going out to explore our beautiful New Mexico landscapes. And I want my grandchildren to still be able to have a flowing Rio Grande River through healthy bosques and healthy forests in the Sandias. And this means we must solve climate by drawing down carbon emission dioxides now. And this is why I'm asking the Environmental Improvement Board to strengthen the New Mexico Environment Department's proposed ozone rules to protect those living closest to development. And it's a huge number. 130,000 New Mexicans live within a half-mile of oil and gas development. As a mother, I ask you, why are we not doing everything for these families to protect their air, to protect children from asthma? We want the strongest rules possible to protect frontline communities who are often Indigenous and people of color. Health and well-being should always come first. As you know, and as you are aware, we can see a methane cloud over New Mexico from outer space. NASA has seen that. And I think we can do much better in New Mexico. We need to see the global implications of New Mexico's methane leaks on the climate crisis. And methane is a greenhouse gas that's 84% more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide in a 20-year time frame. And we cannot afford to leak methane fueling the climate crisis for the next 10 years. Our methane emissions could trigger catastrophic tipping points, such as massive Arctic ice melting, from which there is no recovery. As a mom, I find it hard to sleep at night, already seeing the effects of climate change this summer from extreme weather events, wildfire, and a permanent drought in the Southwest. Thank you. You have the power to enact the strongest rules possible and to help curb emissions. and thank you for taking actions to protect the next generation.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you done?
I am done, and my daughter also has something, but she can sign in herself with the raised hand.
Well, okay. Or if you'd like to put her on right now, yes. If you would
Yes,
raise your hand, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Athena is a lovely name.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Athena and I'm 10 years old. Every kid deserves clean air to breathe. This is why I'm asking the Environmental Improvement Board to strengthen the New Mexico Environment Department's proposed ozone rules. I went down to Carlsbad with my family and saw oil and gas drilling sites. After just 1 hour of being there, my throat burned and my eyes stung. In Artesia, the oil refinery, I could smell the strong smell of chemicals in the air. I can only imagine how hard it is for kids who live next to the oil and gas pollution every day. Their throats must burn every single day. I've met a family member who lives next to oil and gas fracking south of Carlsbad, New Mexico. Their daughter is my age, but she is frequently has nosebleeds and headaches. How is that fair? Why would we allow this to happen to children? Why are we not making sure they have the healthiest places to live and play? I want all kids to be healthy and safe from pollution in New Mexico. I also want the strictest rules to help protect our Earth. I often talk about this, but when the ice caps melt, there is no going back. You can't refreeze ice caps, so we need to do everything we can today to stop methane and carbon dioxide emissions before this happens. Please do the right thing for children in New Mexico and for our Earth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miss Hannah, and thank you to your mother. Let me go back to Catherine Brichalba. Ms. Brichalba, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's
Okay.
terrific. If you would please spell your name.
Yes, my last name is Brichalba, Brijalb, B as in boy, A. And my first name is Catherine, Catherine.
Thank you very much. If you would raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. I'll start your 5 minutes now.
Yes, the oil and gas industry is so important to families in the southeastern corner of New Mexico for the funding of our public schools. Growing up, um, uh, growing up the daughter of somebody who worked in the oil and gas industry at an early age, I learned how important it was for our family that this industry continue. I see how the fluctuation of the industry has impacted not only families, but our local school districts and how we rely on the funds generated to keep our day-to-day operations going. My mother, who is an educator, has been an educator for 30 years, and myself going on 10 years of teaching. I know that I have been able to provide my students in Lee County what they need due to the oil and gas industry. I know that we rely on other industries and other funding to help provide for our students, but for families in our Lee County area, this industry is very, very important, not only for maintaining facilities, infrastructures, being able to provide the latest technology, being able to recruit and retain professional and staff, as well as provide professional development for our schools and our communities. It is just so hard without the funding of the oil and gas industry. We understand that many people may not see things this way, but having been raised in this industry, not only in West Texas, but now calling New Mexico my home, This industry is so important, and I understand that most of our state, even though many people may not agree, it's the southern part of the state that actually funds even the northern part of our state. And so without this industry, our state would definitely struggle, and our families would definitely not see the educational opportunities for their children. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Brichalba. Let's see, let me look again for Sandra West. Just go through the list again. Oh, I see Ms. West. Ms. West, can you hear me?
If I can.
All right. If you would please spell your name for the transcript.
Sandrawest.
Thank you. And raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'll start your 5 minutes now.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking the board for the opportunity to provide comment. I too am in support of Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham's call for nation-leading oil and gas pollution rules. Thus, I am also here to urge you to strengthen the NMED's proposed ozone precursor rules to protect those living closest to the development. A lot of the stats you've already heard, so I don't have to repeat those as much. You understand that there are a lot of people living near that space, and by strengthening the rules, we'll also reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and help reduce the severity of climate change for all of us that live on this rock called Earth, including those of us in New Mexico. So I was born and raised in New Mexico, and I really love this state. I am lucky enough to be able to say that I don't have a story with asthma. I did not grow up within the half-mile range of oil and gas development, and I am lucky to not be one of the statistics of emergency room visits for children with respiratory issues, statistics that are strongly correlated to industries that generate air pollutants, and yes, strongly correlated to oil and gas activities. As a New Mexican, I also want to be proud of the efforts our residents and government, this board included, are taking to build a resilient future for our state. I studied the potential impacts of climate change, and I understand the urgency and potential for this board to play a key role. I'm happy to actually have this moment to say thank you to the NMED for already joining the proximity proposal to require more frequent inspections to find and fix leaks. So thank you so much. It is a great step. And I think there are two other key steps that I'd like to request. And I'd like to request them because if you strengthen these rules, you're laying the foundation for a future where NASA's next methane map of the region will be used to show the drastic improvement from the methane cloud that was covering about 2,500 square miles in 2014. It'll be a future where New Mexico's methane pollution was reduced by up to 1 million metric tons per year, the current leak estimate, and the equivalent of up to 22 coal-fired power plants or 28 million vehicles. It'll be a future more equitable and environmentally just for those most impacted are often historically disadvantaged communities. So how do we get there? Two key things, and I know they've probably been spoken before, but I'm going to say them again because I also support them, to set a strong operator requirements to control pollution during the completion of an oil and gas well, as well as during redevelopment of an existing well. And the second one, to strengthen requirements to cut pollution from pneumatic controllers that are used in oil and gas production, the second largest source of oil and gas methane emissions in New Mexico. I also agree that NMED should require companies to inspect pneumatics for leaks and accelerate the timeline to retrofit and improve equipment. On behalf of all who are and may be impacted, please heed this request. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. West. I just looked again for Mr. Williams and don't see him. Let me look again for Ms. Perkins. Oh, I have one caller. Is this you, Ms. Perkins?
Yes, this is April Perkins.
Hello. If you would spell your name for the transcript.
Aprilterkins.
All right. If you would raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I affirm to tell the truth.
Thank you. I'm going to start your 5 minutes now.
Okay, so I was a little late. What is it I am you would like me to discuss. I know this is about oil and gas. I read something about asthma.
So this is a rulemaking hearing meant to address ozone precursor air pollutants. If you have a comment on the proposed rules, this is the time to offer it.
Oh, okay. I don't know what the proposed rule is. I just personally suffer from asthma, and you know, anything that would make it easier, you know, to breathe would always be nice. And it would be nice to have some attention taken away from oil and gas, because I feel there's so much attention given to those people. So it would be nice to have some attention given to the rest of us. So that's my comment.
Thank you very much, Ms. Perkins.
Thank you.
All right, let me look one more time for Mr. Williams. No. Okay, and I don't have anyone else reaching out through the chat to offer public comment. Ms. Witherspoon, I'm hoping you're with us. Let me ask you if you, no, I guess not. Oh, yes, Ms. Witherspoon? I'm wondering if you wanted to offer your comment this evening. We have just one more day in the hearing. Are you with us? Hover on the platform, but she may not be able to. She may have stepped away. All right, Ms. Katz, are we going to produced water management units?
We still also have, let's see, I'm just looking. We still have natural gas, well, liquids unloading, but
maybe that was what we were doing. And was Lou going to do that? Lou has the lead from industry.
on that one, yeah.
Okay.
So Lou,
and our witness is available. He has a childcare related duty this evening that may take him away for a while, but I think he's available now when we get to that.
All right. Well, this is a good time as far as I'm concerned.
yes, it is for us as well. So we can move to that section. Let me just pull that up.
Madam Hearing Officer, do you anticipate doing another section after that one? And if so, which one? And so we have people available if needed.
I'm happy to do whatever makes the most sense based on the widest witness availability. Ms. Katz, do you have a preference here?
So I believe after this, we would we would have produced water management units, and then there's the environmental NGO's proposal related to well completions.
Our experts for that are not available today, but they're available tomorrow.
Right. So we could potentially get through produced water management units tonight if all the other, and I know that CDG has witnesses for that section. So I guess Mr. Kolklisher might speak to that.
CDG's witness is available for PWMUs tonight.
Terrific.
And we're trying to see if ours is for that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Heiser. Let's hit this topic.
Okay. So this testimony relates to is section 20.2.50.117 of the rule, natural gas well liquid unloading. The testimony on this section appears in NMED Exhibit 32 beginning at page 91, and NMED rebuttal exhibit 1 beginning at page 68. And testimony has been adopted and there are no corrections, so I will have Ms. Keene and Mr. Palmer testify. And Ms. Keene, if you could please summarize the operations that are the subject of this section of the rule.
Yes, good evening, members of the board. We're discussing section 117 today, which covers natural gas well liquids unloading. Liquids unloading is used to remove fluids that are in the well bore of a natural gas well, and managing liquid buildup is fundamental to maintaining production, avoiding early abandonment of wells, and maximizing resource gas recovery. Wells and reservoirs follow a continuum of flow regimes in their economic life as the reservoir depletes, production declines, wellbore velocity goes down, and liquid loading begins to occur in the wellbore. Liquid loading begins when the gas velocity is not sufficient to lift the liquids to the surface. New wells typically have sufficient production rates and flowing velocity so that liquids loading is not an issue. As the reservoir depletes, production rates and velocities decline. Eventually, liquids loading begins to be an issue that needs to be addressed. And the time at which liquids loading occurs varies from well to well based on reservoir characteristics. The following techniques can be used to individually or in combination manage liquids and maintain production. Intermitting, which is shutting in the well so that the well is restarted at the production rate and velocity such that when the well is restarted, the production rate and the velocity are higher and the well can unload the liquids through normal production route to sales. Velocity strings involves installing a smaller diameter tubing string in the well that increases velocity at a given production rate, which drags liquids to the wellbore and prevents liquid loading. Surfactants and foaming agents are also used at the bottom of the well. They create foam with specific gravity, which enables liquids to be carried up the wellbore at lower velocities. Eventually, a well will reach a point where the reservoir energy is not sufficient to remove liquids, and there is both manual and automated liquid unloading that can be employed to address liquid loading. Common methods are the use of a plunger lift, which consists of a plunger that is dropped down the wellbore when the gas pressure declines. That plunger then has a valve that allows gas and liquids to rise up through the wellbore. That valve then closes and the plunger is lifted up and the liquids are expelled. It also includes the use of artificial lift or a pump, and it includes installing wellhead compression.
And Ms. Keene, can you discuss the emissions from natural gas well liquid unloading and the options for controlling those emissions from those operations?
Yes, VOC emissions occur when the well is vented to the atmosphere to unload the fluid, or when the liquids are unloaded through atmospheric tanks, and then the tanks vent to the atmosphere. To reduce VOC emissions and the waste of gas during manual or non-automated liquids unloading activities, operators can monitor the manual liquids unloading events on site within close proximity to the well, or via remote telemetry to ensure that the well returns to normal production operation as soon as possible.
Thank you. And turning to Mr. Palmer, can you discuss the basis for the rule requirements for natural gas well liquid unloading and the estimated emissions reductions and costs?
Yes, the proposed requirements are based on Colorado Regulation 7, Pennsylvania General Permits 5 and 5A, and also Wyoming permitting guidance. Under Colorado Regulation 7, owners and operators are required to first use any means of creating differential pressure to attempt to unload the liquids from the well without venting, and then otherwise to use best management practices to minimize hydrocarbon emissions when venting to the atmosphere. The owner and operator is also required to be present on site during any planned well liquids unloading and to estimate emissions from the event. Under Pennsylvania general permits, the requirements are similar to the Colorado rule, except that control or recovery and or reuse of emissions is required where it is safe to do so. Under the Wyoming permitting guidance, it requires that owners and operators minimize VOC emissions to the extent practicable during manual and automated blowdown venting episodes. And personnel are also required to remain on site to ensure minimal gas venting and to estimate emissions from the event. And I think the on-site stuff probably, I think in those permits, it generally applies to manual liquids unloading. Go to the next one. Thank you. We estimated emission reductions of 4,272 tons per year of VOC for installing plunger lifts at wells where they are not presently in use. We don't have any estimates available to quantify the reductions expected from the implementation of the proposed best management practices. Costs for installing plunger lifts, including the capital costs of $20,000 and operating costs of $2,400, are based on data from a report completed by ICF International called Economic Analysis of Methane Emission Reduction Potential from Natural Gas Systems, and that was from 2016.
Thank you. And Ms. Keene, can you walk through the rules and summarize the provisions and discuss the revisions that were made based on stakeholder comments?
Yes. Again, following the same framework as all the other sections that we've looked at, we received comments from numerous industry stakeholders requesting clarification on compliance deadlines, requesting revisions that specify when liquid unloading operations or which liquid unloading operations are subject to the requirements of this section. We have largely agreed with many of the comments that requested those necessary clarifying revisions. Paragraph A was revised to specify that only those operations resulting in venting of natural gas are subject. The second statement that clarifies that liquid unloading that don't result in venting are not subject to this part. And that third added sentence establishes the compliance timeline for owners and operators to comply with this part. And we've given 2 years from the effective date of this part to comply with the emission standards. Paragraph B outlines the emission standards that are required of an owner or operator subject to this section. Paragraph B1 establishes a requirement to use best management practices during the life of the well to avoid the need for venting of natural gas associated with liquid unloading. Paragraph 2 identifies the types of best management practices that must be used during venting associated with liquid unloading to minimize emissions to the atmosphere. And those include, reducing wellhead pressure before the blowdown or venting to atmosphere, monitoring manual venting associated with liquid unloading in close proximity to the well or via remote telemetry. And paragraph C requires the closing of vents to the atmosphere and returning the well to normal production operation as soon as practicable. Paragraph B3 establishes the methodologies in addition to the best management practices that owners and operators must employ to reduce emissions. Those include use of plunger lift, use of artificial lift, use of a control device, use of an automated control system, or other control if approved by the department. We are not specifying which methodologies need to be employed. We've left this technology neutral to allow for other technologies to have an on-ramp into the section. We struck the requirement to install an equipment monitoring tag on the well. Paragraph C outlines the monitoring requirements. Those include monitoring certain parameters during venting, including the wellhead pressure, the flow rate of the vented gas, the duration of the venting, and then we require owners and operators to calculate the volume and mass of VOC emitted during a venting event. And paragraph 3 was struck, that related to the equipment monitoring tag. New paragraph 3 references the general monitoring requirements of the general provisions of section 112. The record keeping requirements include identifying the unique identification number and the location of the well, the date of the unloading event, record of the wellhead pressure and the flow rate of the vented gas. Again, if it's not feasible, we're allowing the use of a maximum potential flow rate to be used in the calculation. The duration of the venting to the storage vessel, tank, battery, or atmosphere, and a description of the best management practices used to minimize venting before and during the liquid unloading event. We required the documentation of the type of control device or technique used to control VOC emissions during the unloading event, and then a calculation of the VOC emissions vented during the liquid unloading event based on the duration, the calculated volume, and composition of the gas. And then the other two, again, are just general references to the general provisions of section 112. And this concludes this PowerPoint.
Thank you. And that is all the department's summary on its direct and rebuttal pre-file testimony.
Okay, thank you. If you're a party with questions on this topic, please turn on your screen. I see Mr. Heiser.
Good evening, Ms. Keene. I just had two questions to help understand how the department is looking at administering this program. And they have to go with I believe it's the emission standards, which are B3, which talks about the methodologies, and there's a list of ones that are available. Is it your intention that the operator would use any one or more of those technologies?
That is correct.
And then you talk about additional technologies that may be approved by the department, which we strongly support. Would you envision that some of those approvals might become generic so that they would be available to any operator without having to repetitively come to the department for individual approval?
Yes.
Thank you. Those were really my very pragmatic questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heiser. Any other parties with questions? Turn on your camera. No? In that case, I will go to questions from the board. While I'm doing that, if you're an attendee and have a question, please reach out through the chat. Madam Chair?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I have no questions at this time.
Thank you. I believe the Vice Chair had to step away for a few minutes. Member Cates?
Thank you. No comments or no questions.
Thank you. Member Bitzer?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Garcia?
No questions, thank you.
And Member Hunker?
No questions.
All right, thank you. Anything further, Ms. Katz?
No, nothing more from me. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer.
All right. So we're going now to IPA&M's witness. Is that what we're doing?
I believe so.
Mr. Rose?
And Mr. Davis, I think, is on the platform somewhere.
I see him.
I am here.
I haven't seen him yet. There you are. Welcome back. Mr. Davis, and again, Mr. Davis's direct testimony is IPA&M Exhibit 2, and his rebuttal testimony is IPA&M Exhibit 10, and the proposed changes from IPA&M to the department's original proposal is IPA&M Exhibit 1. Mr. Davis, could you summarize your direct and rebuttal testimony on this matter?
Yes, sir. Again, I think Ms. King gave a very good overview of the need for liquids unloading and the reason that we have liquid unloading events occur. And I would just point forward to my written direct for more detail on kind of the life cycle of a well, and not go through that at this point. But what I do want to just highlight there's something that Ms. Keen said, regarding the velocity of the gas. We refer to this as the critical velocity or the critical rate. So the critical velocity is the point in which a liquid droplet is suspended in gas flow. Any flow below that critical rate leads to accumulation of liquids in the wellbore. And so the thing I want to note there is the critical rate is dependent upon the flowing pressure as well as the differential pressure. So the primary purpose behind manual liquids unloading or liquids unloading is maximizing that differential pressure to ensure that we can purge the liquids out of the wellbore. The other thing that I wanted to note regarding liquids unloading is this is something that's carried out on gas wells. The primary commodity that we're producing here is natural gas, and we're removing the liquids that are impeding the flow of natural gas. So I think that's an important designation here. So to jump in to the rule itself, I was really just going to focus on the things where we haven't found complete resolution. I would start off by saying that IPM is very supportive of the use of best management practices that are listed in paragraph 1 and 2 under subsection B. Paragraph 1 covers the best management practices that are carried out by an operator during the life of the well. And then the best management practices that are listed in paragraph 2 are the best management practices that are carried out during the manual liquids unloading activities. And those reduce the emissions associated with natural gas liquid unloading events. We believe these are the most effective measures to reducing emissions from the manual liquids unloading. The methodologies that are listed under paragraph 3 are primarily best management practices that would occur over the life of the well, with the exception of the use of the control device. And I wanted to spend a little time talking about the control device. As I mentioned before, the primary objective with manual liquids unloading is maximizing the differential pressure. And I think it's worth noting at this point that manual liquids unloading is really the last resort. This being a natural gas well, we want to try to maximize the production that we put to sales. So we will try every effort to get this well to unload without having to perform manual liquids unloading, but this is a last resort before we have to bring a swabbing unit out to location. And just for the board's information, swabbing would be where we actually come out, we would open the tubing, we'd run in with a mechanical device to actually remove those liquids from the well. So when I say last resort, swabbing would be the last resort, but manual liquids unloading is the last intervention prior to mechanical intervention. So with that, one of the concerns that we have with the use of a control is this would impede our ability to maximize that differential pressure. If we go back and look at how manual liquids unloadings are performed, the flow from the well is directed to a storage tank. And the reason for this is we're purging liquids out of the wellbore, and we need that vessel to capture those liquids. So we'll direct the flow to the storage tank to purge the liquids. And as we've talked on storage tanks, you know, these storage vessels, you know, may have a 4-ounce, 8-ounce, up to 16-ounce operating pressure, but not a lot of room there to operate a control device. So we have significant concerns with the use of a control device, because in this instance, it poses a safety concern by putting a control device on that storage tank. The other thing that I'd like to point out here that was in my testimony is the application of artificial lift is an engineered solution for gas well deliquification, and is implemented based on individual well characteristics and well site parameters. So, you know, this isn't a one size fits all. We apply artificial lift based on the gas to liquid ratio, pressures, equipment that's available on the site. And one of the things that's worth mentioning as well is the misapplication of artificial lift, and plunger lift in particular, can lead to more manual liquids unloading and ultimately emissions from liquids unloading events. In my rebuttal testimony, I highlighted the department's reference to the EPA greenhouse gas reporting data that indicated 97% of the gas wells in the Permian and the San Juan that require manual liquids unloading currently employ plunger lift. And I think this is, you know, an important thing to note because the large majority of the wells in the state that require manual liquids unloading already have plunger lift installed. As I stated previously, IPNM believes the application of artificial lift is, including plunger lift, is captured under paragraph 1, which is reads that the owner or operator of a natural gas well shall use best management practices during the life of the well to avoid the need for natural gas venting associated with liquids unloading. And I say this, you know, pointing back to the greenhouse gas reporting data, showing that 97% of the gas wells in the state that require manual liquids unloading currently have plunger lift being utilized. And to me, this indicates that, you know, plunger lift installation is not the end-all, be-all cure for the emissions associated with liquids unloading. So IPNM originally proposed to strike paragraph 3 altogether, as we felt like this was covered under paragraph 1. I would mention that if the department feels strongly about listing those methodologies out of paragraph 3, that I feel like they're more appropriate to be listed under paragraph 1, as these are measures that an operator takes through the life of the well, and not necessarily something that's employed as a control strategy for manual liquids unloading. That, for the most part, covers the emission standards and where we still think there are room for improvement in the current proposal. The department did make a lot of good changes, and I want to thank the department for that. One place that you know, I feel like we didn't get the change that we were looking for is under the record keeping section, 1D. This is the record keeping requirements for manual liquids unloading. And 1D is the requirement to keep a record of the flow rate to the extent that it's feasible. And if not feasible, the owner or operator shall use the maximum potential flow in the emissions calculations. We had originally asked that that be referenced as the estimated flow rate. Using the maximum potential flow, I think, will overstate these emissions. One of the reasons that we're performing a manual liquid unloading event is the fact that that well is not capable of flowing at its maximum potential. And so we would like to see that be revised to be just an estimation of that flow rate based on pressures and tubing size. And I think that's all I have, Mr. Rose.
Madam Hearing Officer, I have no further questions of this witness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rose and Mr. Davis. If you're a party with a question, please turn on your camera. Not seeing anyone. I'll turn to the board for questions. If you're an attendee with a question, please reach out through the chat. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer, and thank you again, Mr. Davis, for your testimony. Just so I'm clear again, so I think you were referring to the language under B3 as the employ the methodologies to reduce emissions during venting associated with the liquid unloading event. So I just wanted to make sure I heard right or I understand. So were you in your testimony a few minutes ago recommending that this language, if it's kept in the proposed rule, that it be relocated under Section A? Is that what I heard?
No, it would be still under Section B, but under paragraph 1.
Oh, okay.
I feel like those are best management practices that are carried out during the life of the well.
Okay. And again, has that been, just verifying with me, has that been shared with the department in a proposal so far, or is it just in the verbal testimony?
Just in the verbal, as I had stated, we just originally felt like that was already captured under paragraph 1. And so we had proposed to strike paragraph 3 in its entirety.
Okay. I think that's all I have for right now. Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Trujillo Davis.
I don't have any questions at this time. Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Thank you. Member Cates.
No questions here. Thank you.
Member Bitzer.
No questions. Thank you.
Member Garcia.
Yes, I do have a question, Mr. Davis. You mentioned that what Chair Sweeney mentioned was part B3. Those items were already best management practices. Did I hear you say that?
They would be the methodologies or best management practices that operators take during the life of the well. I think those two are kind of interchangeable there to some degree.
Okay, so then I think I heard you say that the use of the control device could be a safety hazard. So I'm trying to reconcile those two statements.
So we would recommend not listing the use of a control device because we don't think that that's a technically feasible option for controlling emissions. But if the department feels that it's necessary to list out plunger lift and artificial lift, as well as the automated control system, that would be more appropriate under paragraph 1.
Okay, but you still feel like the use of a control device could be a safety issue?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Honker.
Oh, no questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Rose, does any of this prompt redirect?
No, Madam Hearing Officer.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Davis and Mr. Rose.
Thank you.
We will hear from Mr. Smitherman on this topic as well, but it will be tomorrow. Ms. Katz, would there be any follow-up from the department, or would you wait until after Mr. Smitherman?
I think I'll do some follow-up just now because I think it'll be easier for the board to have it done right away after Mr. Davis.
Terrific.
All right. So I have Ms. Keene back up here. Ms. Keene, regarding Mr. Davis's suggestions that the list of methodologies in paragraph B3 be moved to paragraph B1, would the department agree to that revision?
Yes.
Okay. And then with regard to the record keeping requirement in paragraph D1D, would the department agree to allow the use of estimated flow rate instead of the maximum potential flow rate?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Keene and Ms. Katz. If you're a party with a question, please turn on your camera. Mr. Heiser.
I was just going to let you know, Madam Hearing Officer, that Namoga probably will not, Mr. Smitherman will not be speaking to this issue, so you can cross Namoga off the list for this issue.
Thank you very much. If you're a party with a question, please turn on your camera. No? I'll go to the board then. While I'm doing that, if you're an attendee with a question, reach out through chat. Madam Chair.
Madam Hearing Officer, again, just appreciate the collaboration as we move through these rules. Thank you, and no further questions.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis.
I don't have any questions this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Cates. May have stepped away. Member Bitzer.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Garcia.
Questions?
And Member Honker.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Katz and Ms. Keene. Ms. Katz, would you agree with me that if we went as far as we could on produced water management units with the witnesses we have available, that we would be confident of finishing tomorrow without a midnight session?
I would definitely agree with that, Madam Hearing Officer.
Terrific. Let's go to produced water management units.
Okay, just give me a second to get set up here and for my witnesses to get on screen. And this testimony will relate to section 20.2.50.126 of the rule, produced water management units. This testimony appears in NMED Exhibit 32, beginning at page 152, and NMED Rebuttal Exhibit 1, beginning at page 99. Oh, I guess Mr. Palmer isn't on this particular presentation, but he'll be available if need be. All right, and Ms. Keene has adopted her testimony and there are no corrections on this section. So Ms. Keene, can you please summarize the equipment process or process that is the subject of this section of the rule?
Yes. Good evening, members of the board. And we're discussing produced water management units tonight, which, one second. Which is section 126, and is also, there are some specific definitions in Part 50 that I'll refer to later. The majority of oil and gas bearing formations also contain naturally occurring water, often referred to as formation or connate water. When oil or gas is extracted, this produced water is also extracted as a byproduct. The actual amount of produced water varies widely depending on the location or stage in the lifetime of a particular well. In addition to reflecting the chemical makeup of the geologic formation from which it is extracted, produced water will also contain suspended solids, dissolved solids, varying amounts of oil residues and organics containing VOCs, and various chemicals used in the production process. Produced water from gas production typically has higher contents of lower molecular weight aromatic hydrocarbons, such as benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene, than produced water from oil formations. Conventional oil and gas developments typically produce around 7 to 10 barrels of water for every barrel of crude oil produced. And unconventional oil and gas developments produce water from most unconventional resources besides coal bed methane is minimal due to tidal reservoir formations. Producers commonly import water to these operations for on-site use in drilling, fracturing, and production.
And can you discuss the control options for controlling emissions from produced water management units?
Yes, the VOC emissions from produced water management units can be reduced by treating the produced water to remove hydrocarbons before the water enters the recycling facility or impoundment. The emissions are reduced when produced water is processed through separators and storage vessels, which separates the hydrocarbons from the produced water prior to sending to a produced water management unit.
And can you review the provisions of the rule regarding produced water management units and the revisions that were made based on the stakeholder input?
Yes, and let me just state that there is not a great deal of data in the inventory. In fact, there's very, very little data from the inventory on the amount of emissions produced by these types of facilities. We have registrations for several of these types of facilities, and their potential to emit a VOC varies widely, anywhere from low amounts of VOC to up to 50 to 60 tons of VOC emissions. The primary purpose of this section is to utilize best management practices to minimize those volatile organic compounds from these types of facilities. We've made several revisions based on stakeholder feedback on the original proposal. We think that these new requirements will provide good data for us to understand the type and quantity of emissions from these types of facilities. It's also the smallest. It's not the smallest, but it's the most limited kind of section that we have also in the section. So it's going to go pretty fast here as I'm walking through the requirements. So the applicability is outlined in paragraph A. It requires produced water management units, which are specifically defined in this part, to meet the requirements of this section within 180 days after the effective date of this part. Paragraph B identifies the emission standards that must be followed, and those require owners and operators to use best management practices and good operational or engineering practices to minimize emissions of VOCs from produced water management units. There's also a prohibition against the dumping of any untreated produced water to a produced water management unit without first processing and treating the produced water in a separator and or storage vessel to minimize entrained hydrocarbons. Paragraph C outlines the monitoring requirements. These require the owner or operator to develop a protocol to calculate the VOC emissions from each PWMU. The protocol shall include the produced water throughput monitoring, semi-annual sampling and analysis of the liquid composition, hydrocarbon measurement method, identifying representative sample size, and then requirements for chain of custody of that sample. The monitoring requirements also include the owner or operator to calculate the monthly VOC emissions in tons from each unit, with the first month of emission calculations beginning within 180 days of the effective date of this part. They require the monitoring on a monthly basis of the best management or good operational or engineering practices implemented to reduce the emissions, to demonstrate their effectiveness. And upon written request by the department, we will require the owners and operators to sample the PWMU to determine the VOC content of that liquid. And then there is a reference to comply with the general provisions of section 112. The record keeping requirements in paragraph D require the owner or operator to document the identification number, the location, the best management practices and good operational or engineering practices employed to minimize emissions, the protocol that was developed, and the results of any sampling conducted in accordance with the protocol, and then a record of the annual total VOC emissions from each unit. And then the remaining requirements refer again to section 112. And this includes an overview of our direct and rebuttal testimony on produced water management units.
And not quite, because it looks like we left out the definitions associated with this.
Yeah, and I can speak to those.
Yes, I was just going to ask you to go ahead and cover those. We didn't include the slide, so apologies for that.
Yes. So produced water management unit is defined in section 7 as a recycling facility or a permanent pit or pond that is a natural topographical depression, man-made excavation or diked area formed primarily of earthen materials or man-made materials, which is designed to accumulate produced water and has a designed storage capacity equal to or greater than 50,000 barrels. Recycling facility means a stationary or portable facility used exclusively for the treatment, reuse, or recycling of produced water and does not include oil-filled equipment such as separators, heater treaters, and scrubbers in which produced water may be used.
And can you also cover just the definition of produced water, because that is also in the definition section?
I will, yes. Produced water means a liquid that is an incidental byproduct from well completion and the production of oil and gas.
And does the red line that was submitted at NMED Rebuttal Exhibit 23 indicate that there were a few revisions that were made to those definitions based on stakeholder input?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That is then, I believe, the department's presentation of its direct and rebuttal on produced water management units.
Thank you very much, Ms. Katz and Ms. Keene. If you're a party with a question of Ms. Keene, please turn on your camera. Mr. DeSalen.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Can you hear me okay? Good evening, Ms. Kuhn. Just for the record, my name is Charles DeSalen, and I'm an attorney representing the New Mexico Environmental Law Center. And I just have a couple of questions for you regarding best management practices. I was wondering if you could sort of list what some of those best management practices are for produced water management units.
They are using separators and storage vessels to separate the oil from the produced water prior to dumping, but we will have some sort of rebuttal testimony on the specific use of the term dumping, and we are prepared to substitute that with another term. So I will say that it's processing the produced water through the use of a separator or a storage vessel in order to separate the hydrocarbons from the produced water prior to it being processed in the produced water management unit.
Okay, and is that specified in the regulation somewhere?
There's a prohibition against, I don't want to use the term dumping, but there's a prohibition against processing that produced water without it first being processed via a separator or a storage vessel.
Okay, so then it's clear in the regulations as you interpret them that when you use the term best management practices, it's clear what that means, and therefore the regulation will be readily enforceable.
And I would just direct you to subparagraph B2 that contains that specific language.
Okay, very good. That's all the questions I have. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Did I see Mr. Heiser?
Madam Hearing Officer, I think actually Mr. DeSalen and the answer just answered my question, so I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't see any other party on screen. I'll turn to the board for their questions. If you're an attendee with a question, reach out through chat. Madam Chair.
Yes, Madam Hearing Officer, I just have a quick follow-up to Mr. DeSalien's questions. So is there also going to be some additional language changes? I think you referred to as part of your testimony to clarify some of the confusion. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, yes, that is correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis.
Yes, thank you. I am wondering, the definition for produced water management unit includes impoundments or ponds. Does that include ponds used for treatment for hydraulic fracturing later?
It would potentially, if it was, I'm sorry, Madam Vice Chair, yes, it may if it exceeded that capacity.
Okay, so I guess what I'm really wondering about is the NMED and the OCD have worked really, really hard over the last few years to put in stipulations and other rules to encourage produced water recycling and water management. And I'm concerned that this could potentially harm those efforts, and we would then turn to using more freshwater sources. So I'm not really sure what my question is. It's more of I'm expressing my concern for that, and maybe I'm not reading the rule exactly right.
Madam Chair, yeah, Vice Chair, we are acutely aware of the need to not disincentivize the use of fresh water instead of produced water in fracturing of wells. And so we have tailored this requirement to prohibit the use of or the acceptance of that material without it first being separated and handled through a storage vessel, which should reduce those hydrocarbons and not disincentivize the use of fresh water.
Okay, I think I understand how you structured that. So thank you. I don't have any more questions at this time.
Thank you. Member Cates. Member Bitzer.
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Garcia.
No questions. Thank you.
And Member Honker.
I would just echo Vice Chair Trujillo Davis's concern with not disincentivizing recycling of produced water, but no questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Honker. Ms. Katz, any follow-up?
Just one quick follow-up. Ms. Keene, did The department work closely with the Oil Conservation Division in developing the rule language related to produced water management units, as well as with the interested stakeholders to address the concerns raised by Vice Chair Trujillo Davis and Member Honker regarding disincentivizing the use of recycled water.
Yes.
Thank you. That's all that I have.
Thank you, Ms. Katz and Ms. Keen. I believe at this point we go to Namoka and Mr. Nichols. I did make Mr. Nichols a panelist a little bit ago. Mr. Curtis?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Mr. Nichols, are you with us? Do you still see him on the platform, Madam Hearing Officer?
Let me see here. It was Ken, right?
Yes, Ken Nichols.
Okay, so he's no longer a panelist. Oh, I see him back in the attendees. I'll make him a panelist again. Mr. Nichols, can you hear me?
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, and you're also welcome to turn on your video if you have the bandwidth.
All right. I apologize. I'm multitasking here.
All righty. If you would spell your name for the transcript, please.
Aennichols.
And I think I need to swear you, right? If you would raise
Yes,
your right hand, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Mr. Curtis.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Nichols. Can you tell us, the board, a little bit about your involvement in this proceeding?
Yes, I've been asked to talk a little bit about produced water recycling operations and the potential impact of the proposed rule to those operations.
And is NMOGA Exhibit 33, which is previously admitted, an accurate copy of your resume?
Yes.
And can you please just briefly state your qualifications as they relate to your participation in this hearing?
Yes, I went to school at the University of Illinois studying civil engineering, focused on water resources, environmental engineering. I am now a professional engineer in Texas and a Class B water operator, and I'm serving as a regional water team lead for Tetra Tech and also as a geologic carbon sequestration lead. I have over 24 years of experience, with most of that related to water management, and a significant part of that related to water management for oil and gas.
Excellent. Thank you. And is Exhibit A5 and 44, do they reflect your direct and rebuttal testimony filed in this matter?
Yes.
And do you have any changes to that testimony as filed?
No.
I believe we've prepared a presentation to share with the board.
Yes.
Based on the testimony that's been offered thus far, I think many of the issues that we had planned to share have been addressed and covered very well by the other parties. So Ken, if it'd be all right, I'd like to ask you just a question or two, and then I'd like you to display the last slide of your presentation and just talk about a little bit about some of your recommendations based on the September 7th language that the department provided. September 7th and then September 16th. So
Sure.
Can you just talk briefly a little bit about the importance of reuse of produced water and how that interplays with the rule that we're looking at today?
Yes, especially I think in Southeast New Mexico, it's critically important that we recycle as much water as practical. I think it's important that we've made significant progress in the last several years, recycling a larger and larger percent of the water that's used. And I think if we put too many restrictions on that, we could reduce the amount that's recycled in the future.
Thank you. And do you believe that the department's current proposal to not allow dumping of untreated produced water to a produced water management unit without first processing and treating the produced water in a separator and/or storage vessel to minimize entrained hydrocarbons addresses that concern and provides a good balance of allowing recycling of used produced water and reducing emissions?
Yes, I think if the water can be processed in some way prior to being stored in a produced water pond or pit, that should have a significantly positive effect on potential emissions.
And it will allow the continued recycling of produced water?
Yes, I believe so.
Excellent. If you wouldn't mind, if we can share your very last slide. I believe you had some recommendations based on the language that was filed on September 16th.
Yes, let me see here. I'll share. See if this shows up. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
When I was looking through the proposed language, I just had a couple minor comments. The first one is shown on the screen. I thought that the use of the term best as far as management practices might be subjective, and would suggest that we use an industry standard practice or something similar, just to provide some flexibility for operators to apply technologies to their specific situation.
And did you hear the testimony of Ms. Keene earlier that more or less the requirements outlined in B2 to use to treat the produced water in a separator and/or storage vessel would be consistent with the use of best management practices?
Yeah, I think there's a variety of different ways of treating the water, but I think if we can go through some preliminary treatment like that, that should have a good impact on potential emissions.
Thank you. Can you speak a little bit to your second recommendation there and what the basis for that is?
Yes, the other thing I noted, using the word minimize related to the entrained hydrocarbons, I thought might be a little bit difficult to actually measure, as far as how we would actually minimize the concentrations. It might be better to just use appropriate technology for the purpose of removing entrained hydrocarbons. That would eliminate the potential of trying to hit a zero target or something that might be unpractical.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols, for sharing that testimony. Did you have anything to add to your testimony up to this point?
No, I don't believe so.
With that, Madam Hearing Officer, I make Mr. Nichols available for any other questions.
Thank you very much. If you're a party with a question, please turn on your camera. Don't see anyone. I'll go to the board. While I'm going to the board, if you're an attendee with a question, please reach out through the chat. Madam Chair?
I don't have any questions at this time. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis?
I don't have any questions either. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Nichols.
Thank you. Member Cates? Member Bitzer?
No questions. Thank you.
Okay. Member Garcia?
Questions, thank you.
And Member Hunker?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Nichols, for your testimony. And Mr. Curtis, I believe at this point we go to Ms. Campsey or Ms. Cooper. Is that correct?
Yes, Ms. Cooper.
Okay. I see you, Ms. Spall. And I see, okay, and I see Ms. Cooper. Please go ahead.
Excellent. So Ms. Cooper's testimony has been introduced into the record. Her direct Appendix C, her rebuttal Appendix E. Ms. Cooper, please state your name and employer and position for the record.
Bill Cooper, I'm a senior principal at Geosyntec Consultants.
And
it's hard to hear you, Ms. Cooper. Can you?
Okay, I will speak up. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
And Ms. Cooper, the department made some revisions to section 126 and various definitions in section 7. What's your opinion about the revised rebuttal regulation? And do you have any recommended changes to the most recent draft of those regulations?
Yeah, overall, we really appreciate the department's efforts they've taken in listening to and engaging with stakeholders on modifications to this section and the regulation as a whole. We agree with the current language in section 7, the definitions DD, HH, and II that were brought up by the department earlier, and the changes to section 126 with 2 minor requests. We have shared these requests with the department and appreciate the department's willingness to consider our first point already in their testimony. First, in section 126B2, the term dumping is used when discussing the transfer of produced water into a produced water management unit. The term dumping suggests the water is being spilled or released into the environment. Operators of produced water management units are not doing anything like that. We would recommend using a more common industry term, such as transfer. This change clarifies the rule and aligns the language of the regulation with a term commonly used when managing produced water. The second minor change, a request we have, is in section 126C1. We ask that the term sample be added before the phrase and chain of custody requirements. The rule as drafted could be misread as a requirement to keep a chain of custody for every gallon in the produced water management unit. We understand that the department intends for operators to keep a chain of custody for water samples, which is consistent with industry practice. Thank you very much.
Ms. Cooper, do you have anything else you'd like to add about this section of the regulation?
Other than we thank the department's cooperation in working with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cooper is available for cross-examination.
Thank you very much, Ms. Spall and Ms. Cooper. If you're a party with a question, please turn on your camera. Don't see anyone. I'll go to the board then for their questions. If you're an attendee with a question, please reach out through the chat. Madam Chair, any questions?
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Cooper, and for those clarifications. At this point, I don't have any other questions.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis.
I echo those sentiments, and I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Member Bitzer.
Pretty straightforward. No questions. Thank you.
Member Garcia.
No questions, thank you.
And Member Hunker.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Again, Ms. Cooper and Ms. Spall.
Thank you.
Ms. Katz? I believe we're going to hear a little more from the department at this point, right?
Yes. I will bring Ms. Keene back up. And Ms. Keene, what is the department's response to the suggestions that were proposed and shown by Mr. Nichols in his testimony?
Those are acceptable changes to the proposal.
Okay, thank you. And I believe that's all we have at this point in response.
Thank you very much, Ms. Katz and Ms. Keene. Again, if you're a party with a question, please turn on your camera. No. Turn to the board. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Just so I'm clear, so the recommendations by Ms. Cooper were those already addressed? I'm sorry if I missed it. It's been a long day. Thank you.
I didn't ask that and I should have. I'm sorry. I meant to ask, do you also accept the recommendations proposed by Ms. Cooper?
Yes, we do.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer, and thank you for that clarification, Ms. Katz, and thank you, Ms. King, as well.
It's been a long couple weeks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo David.
No, I'm good, thank you.
All right, Member Bitzer.
Ditto, good as well. Thank you.
You, Member Garcia. She said no questions, and Member Honker.
Just thanks to the department and the other stakeholders for working together so well. No questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Katz and Ms. Keen, again. So I'm delighted that we got to this point where we feel confident that we'll finish tomorrow on this rulemaking hearing. Let me encourage all council to review those places where we know we have some witnesses to go back to. I know we'll be hearing on a couple of topics from Mr. Alexander and Mr. Smitherman in particular. That's not a complete list. And also, please, if you would review those exhibits that you want to make sure in the record, if they haven't already been admitted. And is there anything else we can do this evening? Remember also, Council, one more thing, sorry. We will have a discussion about the post-hearing process. I don't accept verbal closing argument. So if you have closing argument to make, I'm going to ask you to put that in writing, but that's not how we're going to end this hearing. Ms. Katz, anything else to mention before we tackle our last day?
I don't believe so. I mean, maybe perhaps if the other council are able to just send around their understanding of what we still have left. I am not quite keeping track of that at the moment anymore, so that could be helpful.
All right. Thank you for that. I have some notes, but they may not be complete. Mr. Heiser?
Yes, I was wondering, Ms. Katz, whether we wanted to put into the record Mr. Palmer's and Mr. Myers' one-page spreadsheets on that cost calculation, just so that that was more readily accessible.
Yes, I think we should, and so I can send our Mr. Palmer's version out this evening.
We'll circulate it as well, then plan to move it tomorrow, unless there's, pending objection from someone. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Anything else from anyone else? No? Terrific. Well, let's start with public comment at 9 then. Thank you all. Have a good evening.